Let's talk disk partitioning. So, when we install Windows, we have to actually look at the partition. First of all, the partition is how we organize our disk. So the size is going to matter. So when you first install Windows, it has maybe a pre-configured hard drive. If it doesn't, it will give you the prompt to configure one or just allow you to create a new one. When you do that, it creates a master boot record, an MBR type disk. This is how all the files are organized on the disk. So the partition size, again, Microsoft recommends at least 16 gigs of hard disk space for Windows 10 32-bit, 20 gigs for Windows 10 64-bit. Remember that the system and the boot partition, when you install Windows 10, these files are going to be stored into certain locations. The system partition and the boot partition. The system partition and the boot partition are the same partition, but organized different. The system partition contains the files needed to boot into Windows. The system partition can also be set as either a MBR or GPT. This is automatically done for you if you did not prep the disk ahead of time. If it does it for you, it's going to be an MBR. It is often the first physical hard drive in the computer. However, it doesn't have to be. The files stored on the system partition do not take any significant disk space. Normally it's under 100 megs. And then the rest of it will be the C drive or the primary drive, and that will be the active partition. The boot partition contains Windows 10 operating system files by default. The disk partition can also be manipulated using a disk partition configuration utility, either one that's built into Windows, DiskPart, or a third party. Alright, so what's the big deal with this? I mean, who cares about disk partitions? Realistically, partitions are going to be the way that we organize logically our physical disks. So we do have to be careful on how we do it. A lot of the times we have just one giant partition, and that's fine. However, there is some logic behind separating or segmenting the physical disks. In Linux has several partitions as opposed to just one. So it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So let's look at this inside of Windows. Alright, so I'm in my Windows 10. I'm going to go ahead and get a folder explorer file browser up. You'll notice I only have my optical drive, my D drive, and my primary drive, C. If I go to computer management, we're going to look at the partition that I have. Actually, I don't know why I did that. I wanted these side by side. So disk management, we're going to use the built-in disk management tool in Windows. First thing it sees is I have a new partition, I have a new disk that's plugged in. I have a 10 gig that is unknown, not initialized. So I have to initialize it before I can even do anything with it. And again, we have MBR or GPT. GPT is the newer version, and it's used for large disks. MBR is an older technology, but is still relevant. So I'm going to leave it the GPT by default. It brought it online, so I have a new disk, but you'll notice I don't have a new drive yet. That's because the space has been unallocated. It's not actually allocated. I will right click, I'll do a new volume. Volume or partition at this sense are going to be the same term. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set 5,000. I will set it to E drive, that's fine. And I can leave it as an NTFS, that's fine. And I have a new drive. And you'll notice my new drive is my 4.88 gigabytes or my 5,000 megabytes. I have all of this extra space. Well, I can create a new partition. And now I have two around about 5 gig partitions. I can delete a partition if I want. That drive went away, and it frees up that space. If I want one giant partition, I can extend my first one. Give it a second, it should refresh. And now it's my full 10 gigs. This is the partition structure that was set up for Windows when I installed Windows. 100 megabytes automatic for the system partition. C drive became the active partition, or the basic data partition. And then they had 500 megs of just recovery data for Windows. This is the structure that Windows will always do. The C drive portion is going to be dependent on how large your drive is. I had a 60 gig drive, a 60 gig drive, so it allotted the majority of that to my data or my active partition. You always end up with a 100 megabit system partition and a roughly 500 megabyte recovery partition. Those are automatic defaults. And again, this is how we can manipulate and play with our partition. We use the default disk management tool, but you could do a third party if you wanted to. Way outside the scope of what we were doing, but you definitely could. Alright, that is all for our disk partitions. If you have any questions, any concerns, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.